Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Sasha here, and today I am going to be investigating Paul Betts part 3. Oh my god, what a demon, and what a lot of confusion and a nightmare and creepy stuff has been going on. Oh my days. So yeah, if you haven't watched part 1 and part 2, then I suggest you go and do so, but I can give you a little run through of what we've established so far while profiling Paul Betts. Paul Betts being the father of Leah Betts. Leah Betts, the anti-drugs icon, I've seen her called, which is all a bit weird, don't you think? But yeah, she's been called that. And we have been investigating all the things that he kind of said afterwards, and also in episode 2, a deep dive on the very dark and creepy book that is The Party's Over, Living Without Leah. So, what have we established? The main thing. So we established that Paul Betts was a Met Police officer, inspector for 28 years. He was working in the Dagenham and Romford area, which also includes Upminster, but I think the main area was Dagenham and Romford. He had made his way up to police inspector, and he was in charge of the neighbourhood policing, so he had a team of police officers, and he was in charge of all of them. Now, we also found out that Janet being the stepmother of Leah Betts, was previously married to another policeman, who was in fact a colleague of Paul Betts, and his friend and colleague, and it was actually kind of a couple that they knew, his friend and colleague, Alec. Well, he fancied his wife, Janet. And then, so in 1980, Paul and Janet, I think I've realised that they had an affair, and they split up with their relevant wife and husband in 1980, when Leah was just 3 years old. So Paul Betts and Dorothy have had Leah. She's 3 years old, and old Paul Betts went on about being lonely and that he was just not getting enough attention from his wife, who was working as a teacher as well as bringing up a baby. And so he fancied a bit of Janet. And Janet had 3 children already with Alec. She had Wendy, 10 years old, and Emily, who was 5 years old, and little Cindy, who was 4 years old. But that wasn't enough to stop them going off with each other's partners. And so in 1982, Dorothy did divorce Paul Betts for adultery. And it is stated in the book that she had a lot of hate for him. And Dorothy mysteriously drops dead in 1992 of a heart attack. And Paul Betts says some really horrible things about this, making it easier for his access to Leah. And in a really callous way. He says it might sound callous. Well, yes, it did. We also found out that he was aware of Tony Tucker already, long before anything happened at this party. And because Tony Tucker was the face of Hollywood's Romford Club, the biggest 2,000 people super club on his patch. So yeah, Tony would have been a major problem for old Paul Betts and his policing, with the amount of narcotics that he was shifting. We also really learn how the story of, well, basically Paul Betts' story kept changing and changing and changing, and Janet's story changed, and it was all very, very, very peculiar, that this very tragic and something that you would remember so well. They just seem to get the story wrong for some reason. We also learned that Paul was retired in 1994 after an incident with a mother at St. Peter's Church in Dagenham. Now, I can tell you, and you heard it here first, that I have a very, very exclusive conversation coming up regarding this particular incident. I'm not going to tell you with exactly who yet, but I can tell you it's somebody that unfortunately got to know Paul Betts rather well. Not in that kind of way, in a disturbing policeman way. So yes, I will be telling you more about that. Watch this space. So, but yeah, Paul is retired, and you know this story about him being retired because of a ring pull hurting his eye, and then him being attacked in the church, and that he just couldn't face going back to work ever again, and he had post-traumatic stress disorder and was suddenly retired. And we are becoming more and more aware that when there are allegations of corruption, or when police are doing things that they're not supposed to and are getting found out, unfortunately, what has been happening in the force is they've been retired very early. And Paul Betts was retired at 48 years old. Yes, no, I've never found anybody, and like any other career, where when you leave it, you retire when you're like in your 40s. I mean, you know, yeah, there's retiring because you've got so much money, then you can just put your feet up. But you know what I'm saying? So this incident and his whole retirement and him having PTSD, all very suspect, don't you think? Well, I can tell you, I've got more to come on that one. Yes, I have. One of the most disturbing things that we did find out is really the dark and sinister way that Paul was talking about his daughter Leah, and talking about her in the book that was written, well, it was published in 1997, so it's not long after she died. Now, we found out, and this was something that I knew back then, that Leah did not live with her dad. In the book, it does reveal that she did not have a bedroom at her dad's house, and that Paul had not actually lived with Leah since he'd left her mum at 3 years old. So he'd not lived with Leah for a long time. And then, of course, there was the disturbing, and as I said, most disgusting and damn right, all I can say is nonsense, the way he talks about Leah. Now, he said things like, if he was 20, when she came down the stairs, if he was 20 or 30 years younger, then he would have fancied her. And that she looked really tasty. Oh my God. And pure. And that they were having arms around the neck and arms around the waist slow dances. Oh, it was all very, very, very creepy. It's very, very clear that they were playing very dumb about their knowing anything that was going on, and that they would even been drinking alcohol or anything like that, and that they'd only provided Coke and lemonade. But this really didn't ring true, actually, as in earlier in the book, and I have read the whole book. Janet Betts saying that she was at work that day, and she'd been really, really like kind of talking with her friend and colleague at work about having 30 or so teenagers over for an 18th birthday party, and being, you know, a bit worried about it. Well, what was she worried about? You know, Coke and lemonade. If she thought it was going to be a Coke and lemonade party, then what was she worried about? What was she talking to her mates at work about? Teenagers coming around. And when it says that William came in and said that Leah was unwell, and Janet remarked, and I thought, here we go, she's probably had too much to eat. Because you always think that, don't you? And was that what she was worried about when she was talking to her colleague, that these teenagers might have too much to eat at the party? I mean, really, it's just absolutely ridiculous. So they play really, really dumb. Now, a critical point that I want to point out to everybody is this diversion around ecstasy, and it being the reason that she stopped breathing. When the 999 call in the book says that when Janet was just dialing the last 9, she suddenly stopped breathing, and the first thing that she says to the operator is that she's taken ecstasy, been drinking alcohol, and then says that they've given her water. Now, I have put forward the potential that Leah had done another E at about 12:30, which is when William has caught her coming up like a rocket. She's throwing up. Dad's stepmother and father have come in. He's gone apeshit. He said he went apeshit. They've gone apeshit. Told her she's like trying to bring her round or whatever because they think she's out of it. Maybe sticking her head in, making her drink water, all of this. Then she's probably choked on the amount of water that they're trying to make her drink. Can't get rid of it, and then she stopped breathing. And I've seen people choking on their own vomit as well, and that sounds like a very, very plausible reason for her to stop breathing. And that actually there was an hour between William coming in at 12:30 and then 1:30 the 999 call. So within this hour they've just given her a load of water because they say she was out of it the whole time. So she definitely wasn't drinking water of her own accord, was she? And what was the cause of death? Water, they said. Intoxication. So surely whoever gave her water and kept giving her water was the cause of her death. Stands to reason, doesn't it? And after that, Paul alerts the press himself at the first possible opportunity. It's just all very, very dark. So that's what we've established in the first ones. Let's watch a couple of videos, shall we? One sec. This one.
Time I actually saw her take the ecstasy tablet with her friend. This was the first time I actually got a chance to spy. I know I shouldn't have, but I was still 11 at the time. It was just like them taking an ordinary paracetamol. There wasn't any, looking around and all of this sort of stuff. It was just ordinary in the mouth. That was it.
When she got dressed, she spent ages getting dressed, and she came downstairs and she was wearing a maroon brushed velvet top and a long black pencil skirt, and she got the makeup on and everything. And that was my first image of Leah as a woman. Before, she was a tomboy and really still a girl, but to see her dressed like this, and she came downstairs and she did this little twirl, was something incredible.
Yeah, he's proper dodgy. So, we all know who Carlton Leach is. Well, I think most people know who Carlton Leach is. What's Carlton have to say?
Coincidence that within 3 weeks of her dying, that they got killed. 3 weeks later. Do you not think that's suspicious? I'm just talking out of turn, just top of my head. They could not have done that without professionals, people there.
And so, and we will come on, obviously, to Paul Betts' involvement in the Essex boys' death and the conspiracy to get rid of Tony Tucker-Pate and Craig Ralph. Because as far as we are led to believe, and we are aware that it really was the police that got them down the lane, and the police corruption and the police involvement is why no truth has been put out, and that the whole story of exactly what happened on that night and the whole story about Leah Betts has never come to light. So here's a little bit of what Paul Betts says about the Essex boys murders. Now, this was on a programme which I believe, those like religious Sunday morning programmes on like BBC Two and things like that. I think it's one of those. I'm not quite sure what it's called, but it's that kind of programme.
Religious feelings that you now have and your belief in God, does it make you feel any differently towards the person who supplied the ecstasy?
I've got to be very careful here, haven't I?
Or to dealers in general?
In dealers in general, well, I'll show. You said to me earlier on, perhaps you're a Christian. Now, perhaps Christians won't have this thought, but not long after Leah's death, 3 men were found shot dead in a Range Rover. And they were the main dealers who were supplying Essex with drugs,
Essex,
who also supplied Leah.
So that is completely not true in the essence of, yes, they were one or three of the dealers that were in Essex. They're not supplying a whole of Essex. Essex was huge. There's loads and loads and loads of dealers in Essex, and that is ridiculous. And they were not responsible for supplying the ecstasy to Leah or her friends.
And it was just before the Christmas. Now, people will now stand up and say, he can't be a Christian. I tell you what, that was the best Christmas present I could have had.
Best Christmas present. Really? Best Christmas present. 3 guys get shot dead. That got nothing to do with your daughter dying, mate. Nothing.
Because they had been taken out of the scene. They could not hurt anybody else. And as far as I was concerned, that was it.
How do you reconcile that feeling, though? That feeling of being glad that those people were dead?
I don't.
You don't try?
I don't try. Because as far as I'm concerned, and this is my personal feeling, I don't believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But as far as I'm concerned, if somebody is so greedy, so selfish, so into themselves that they are prepared to injure, maim, sell death to other people just to earn money, if that's the way, as some people say, God dealt with it, fine by me. I've got no problem with that whatsoever. As for me going out and doing it, that would be something totally different. But it was
Did you see the way he laughed, where his grin went up there? Whoa.
done, and that's it.
That would be
for
something
drug
exactly
dealers,
different.
Well, I feel exactly the same, even now. If they are willing to put at risk other people, I've got no problem in wanging them in a cell, turning the key and dropping it down the nearest drain. Because as far as I'm concerned, they are a leech on society. Now, maybe my views are black and white. I don't care. That's the way that I now see it.
So those religious
My views on what's a leech on society is child abusers. Yes, those. And this is the biggest problem that we have in society. And this guy giving it their dealing death, that's just absolute nonsense. It doesn't work like that. And yes, of course, I'm not condoning it, but you know, the way he talks, it's just very irksome. He's not a Christian, and he tries to say that God dealt with it. God, or him and some other dodgy cops, you know? It's all very dodgy. So, a few just while we're on this subject, before I go back diving into the organ donation, harvesting, funeral, and how they really don't even, well, Paul Betts never mentions the Essex Boys in the whole book and everything about, you know, what went on there. He doesn't even mention it anyway. Before I go on to that, a little
the police
look
were
at this.
looking into Paul Betts as a suspect. He was an ex-policeman, so he could have potentially had that knowledge from his colleagues that Tony Tucker was the one who ran the door at Raquel's.
I never saw Tony on the door at Raquel's. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But as far as I'm concerned, he was on the door at Hollywood's. Right, okay, so we're going to get stuck right into the book again, and we're on page 27. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into the whole book, as that would take way too long. I have gone through it to spare all of you, so that you don't have to read it, because it's so dark, and I'm pulling out the most pertinent bits. But I can tell you that you can read it for free online, and if you would like to, then it does give you an overall much better picture and feeling. It's like reading and getting into the mind of psychopaths, or, you know, it's proper weird. One of the things that was said by Paul was that Leah was wanged off to the hospital, and neither of them went with her. But in this book, it says that Janet went with her. And so Janet goes off to the hospital with her, and then Paul gets there afterwards. But in this book, actually, Janet is talking for most of the time. Now, in this particular bit is when the first mention of organ donations starts. So only on page 27, it was page 21, which was the 999 call. They then get to the hospital, them having such good friends. So here's their such good friends. One of them, Andy Hamill, turned up. He was a student at Reading University, and he had been travelling back to Reading from Essex when the news of a girl who had taken ecstasy came on over the radio. When he heard our names, he immediately turned his car around and drove straight to the hospital. He was wonderful and stayed with us for 3 weeks after Leah died, becoming our PR man. Andy Hamill, love to talk to you, and handling the hundreds of press calls coming into our home. We don't know what we'd have done without him. Gone mad, most probably. Meanwhile, Peggy and Hugh had taken William back to their home, Peggy and Hugh. But then, listen to this. 2 of our other friends, Alan and Jill Rose, played their part as well. They went to our home and tidied everything up for us, putting all the furniture back in place. Alan runs UK Transplant Limited, an organ donation organisation. He takes teams all over the country and abroad to remove organs and take them to patients who need them. The thought of coming to see Leah under similar circumstances was too much for him, so he hadn't come to the hospital. Oh God. Next friend, the police press liaison officer, Peter Lorry, came to see us in the waiting room at the intensive care unit. Stephanie Martin, the PR lady at Brimfield Hospital, was with him. The press have got hold of all of this. There's obviously great interest. They told them. She said our phones haven't stopped ringing. I mean, this is while their daughter's on a life support machine. Peter told us, I used to be a journalist, so I know how they can behave. In this case, I don't think they will, but if you feel you can, be up to it. So it basically goes on to say that this might be a good opportunity to talk to them. And so this old police liaison officer, who, just let me remind you of his name, is Peter Lorry. I have looked him up. Yes, he was a journalist for years. Then he became police press liaison officer, Peter Lorry, and he was writing in The Law, which is the policeman's newspaper. Don't know if it's still going, but yeah, it's right, dodgy old newspaper. Anyway, so here we've got Alan and Jill from UK Transplant Limited, just happened to be their best friends. What's the chances? I don't know. So anyway, here they go on, obviously, now to talk to the press, and there's the whole big press conference. Now, like I said before, this press conference was literally like as if a little girl had been murdered. And that is not the case when a girl has been drinking, doing drugs, and dropped at her party or any party. It is not cause for a mass manhunt, and that mass manhunt immediately happened. Now, all eyes were on Raquel's because the friends of Leah's said that they had bought the thrills there. And on the Friday night, so all eyes were on Raquel's, and there I was as the barmaid on the Friday night afterwards, turned out around Market Square, and the whole world's press was there. Oh my God, it was mental. I'll never forget it. It was quite funny actually, because I was talking to John Bradbury, who was the resident DJ for Raquel's, and we knew John quite well back then. And John said that actually Boy George came that night. He wasn't booked, but he came in as stand-in, and there was hardly anybody there apart from the undercover police. And Boy George came on and started with "We Are E." by Lenny Dice, is it? Lenny Dice? So, where are we? So we're getting on to the old organ side of things. Now, let me see where we go from here. So here we are on page 30. And it's now Tuesday, November the 14th. So she's got it in there on Sunday morning. It's now Tuesday. And so it's important to know, and I will say this as to why, because there is a glaring gap in their chronological date order in this book, because it goes right through till the 1st of December. And then suddenly there's a 3-week gap between the next entry, which is quite significant as to what was going on around that time. Anyway, I'll come to that. So Tuesday, November the 14th. This is Janet once again talking. We were told that there had been so much publicity about Leah's situation that the hospital had taken on an extra telephonist to handle all of the calls. It was the same in the intensive care unit. In the end, they would only allow family calls to come through. Wendy, Cindy and Emily and my mother were spending most of the days with us, and other friends popped in and out. William also visited Leah, but only for short spells, as it was too much for an ordeal for an 11-year-old to stay in all the time. Not surprised. Dr. Alistair Short, a tall, rather abrupt Scotsman, came to us and said, "There's been no change in Leah's condition. We have carried out several tests, but nothing's happened. I don't think there's much hope for the future." That's when Paul began asking me more questions. I think, by now, the penny had dropped. Throughout all the time we had been with Leah in the hospital, there had been something bearing heavily on my mind, says Janet. Something I hadn't found able to share with Paul. Leah's mother, Dot, had chosen not to have Leah baptised. She felt baptism should be the individual's choice, a choice to be made when they are old enough to make a considered decision. And that was what Dorothy thought. And obviously Leah knew that. And Leah hadn't made that decision at 18 years old yet to be baptised. But although Paul and I are not exactly Bible bashers, we were both Christians, and I was so worried that Leah had not been baptised. I just didn't know how I should let Paul know how I felt. However, unknown to me, Paul was thinking along the same lines. Don Gordon, our local vicar, was also a friend, and Paul decided to ask him to come to the hospital to say a prayer for Leah. Don readily agreed and came within a couple of hours. Oh, I've got a picture of Don. Let me show you. Let me show you the picture of Don. Are we ready for a nice picture of Don? And we can see what everybody thinks. I think it's this one. Let me just check. I'm pretty sure it is, yes. So here we have Don, the friendly priest. Oh, we love a friendly priest, don't we? There's nothing to worry about with them ever. Oh dear, let me see if I can find him. Oh, here we go. There we have it. So on the left, we have Don, the friendly priest. And then we have William, who's turned out to be doing the worst things to women and children. You know the one, PDF file. And Mother Dearest, Janet. And Masonic. I mean, these look like Masonic gloves, don't they? Somebody tell me, are these Masonic gloves? Because Paul Betts looks like he's wearing a Masonic glove to me. And allegedly, this is the day when Paul and William both get confirmed. You know, like when they renew their baptism vows. And that's what's going on there. But they look like those funny Mason gloves, you know, the weird things that they wear. What do you think? So that's old Don. So poor old Leah, it's Tuesday. They've already written her off, and they are getting her the local vicar in to get her baptised. Well, I mean, each to their own thing. Do you want a couple of other pictures? I've got some other pictures here. Let me show you some other pictures. We love a few pictures, don't we? That we've got here. So we've got, look at this one. This one's interesting. Here we've got William, but Paul at the back as well. Look, check him out in their choir gear. I wonder if anybody at this church has got any disclosures to make. What do we wonder? I'm not saying everything's dodgy at the church, but it is very, very common. That's what we're finding, aren't we? Common. And let's just have another picture for you before we get off on that. Here we've got another bishop. The Bishop of Bradwell. Paul and William with the Bishop of Bradwell. It's always Paul and William, isn't it? William's always in on the act, little boy there. And he was the patron of ADA. Now, ADA was Action for Drug Awareness, which is what they launched after Leah died. However, it was not a registered charity. It was not registered properly. And I've got a very, very strong feeling that they probably used all the money for themselves. Prove it otherwise. Okay, back to this book, because I've got to go over this dark organ stuff with you, just for everybody to get in the picture, because, well, it really did upset me. Hold on, let me just find it. I found it quite sick. We've already found out that they've got best friends that are clearing up some of the party that are from UK Transplant Limited. Well, that's very dodgy. So we're on page 32 now, and we're on Wednesday, November the 15th, and they say that the doctors have come back in to see us and that they've got to carry out more tests. They suspected brain stem death, and another test would have to be done again later in the day. But if there was no change after the second test, we were told it would be assumed that there was brainstem death, and there would be no way back for Leah. She was wheeled away for the test. We have never prayed so much in our lives, even though they're already saying that they know she's dead, but it was in vain. By the end of the day, we were given the news we had been dreading. Leah was brain stem dead. Now, there is an awful lot about organ harvesting and everything online, so if people want to go and have a look at it. But obviously what brainstem dead means is that the brain is not functioning, but the body is still alive. Now, I always think this is a bit dodge, if you ask me, because if somebody is still alive, I do believe, while they're still breathing, that there is still an awful lot of chance that the brain can come back. I know people can be brain dead and all of this kind of thing. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but, this is all very dodge. Anyway, listen to this. Paul, it was news that finally drove me to kick God into touch. I was going through every possible emotion and was so angry that God could let this happen. There was my daughter. She was warm. She was beautiful and unmarked. She had a lovely colour to her, and her chest was going up and down. How could he let this happen? One of Leah's feet became uncovered, and I just stroked it from top to bottom with my finger. Suddenly, her toes curled right up. I was overjoyed. Yes, we've cracked it. We're there, I thought, only to be told this was just a natural reflex. The body didn't need a brain to do that. Really? I felt so deflated because I thought there was hope after all. I'd heard some coma patients do nothing for years, then one day wake up demanding their breakfast. Why couldn't my daughter do that? Well, you didn't give her much chance, did you? So on the next page, on page 33, right, prepare yourselves, everybody. So it's just going to get worse. So the respirator was taken away. So yeah, it's still Paul talking. When we saw Dr. Shaw, Jan said to him, "My God, I don't know if we can make this decision." We were told politely it was not our decision to make, but that before the machine was switched off, we could have all the time we needed to say our goodbyes to Leah. Is that right, doctors, nurses? Is that how it works? I don't think they'd be told it was not their decision to make, would they? Or if they were, that's really dodgy. Anyway, if we were asked if we would have wanted the machine to be left on, I would have said yes. After all, as long as Leah was there, I had hope. I know it was stupid hope. After all, her brain was dead. But Leah looked alive and perfect. It wasn't like she'd been in an accident. There were no marks on her. Keeps saying that, doesn't he? Or was there? Apart from the tube making her breathe, she looked so normal. If ever we had to trust a team of doctors, this was the time. Now this gets really weird. Here we go. So a few weeks earlier, Leah had decided to answer an appeal on BBC Essex, our local radio station, for people to carry donor cards. Just weeks earlier, she decided to answer an appeal on BBC Essex. There were after 100 names to add to the register. Leah telephoned the station, but was told that at 17 years of age, she was not old enough to carry a donor card. She was very disappointed. What? How many 18-year-olds do this? Has anybody ever known it? Now, so soon after that disappointment, her body was about to be taken into an operating room to be prepared for organ donation. We had told the medics of Leah's wish to become a donor. The moment at which the machine was to be switched off had to be timed precisely so that the various transplant teams were ready to remove the organs. The machine was scheduled to be switched off in the early hours of the morning. Leah was put into a room on her own before being taken into the operating room. That's when it really hit us. The family had gathered to say goodbyes. The nurses were reluctant to allow William to be alone in the room with Leah, but he insisted, almost pushing one of the nurses out of his way. While William was in the room, we were aware Dr. Short becoming very angry with someone on the other end of a telephone line in the background. Apparently, the Home Office pathologist needed tissue samples, and could they take them before the organs were being donated? Dr. Short was shouting into the telephone, "Do you really think I'm going to put this family through all of this for another 24 hours because you can take your tissue samples?" I don't think this happened to you. It goes on. It's proper dark, isn't it? So he's saying that obviously the pathologist is saying it wanted samples from before the organs were removed, but obviously that didn't happen because that's why he's saying it, I think. Saying that he was insistent that the doctor was saying that everyone had gone through enough and they could, and that included the staff. That's a load of bollocks. I'd like to talk to anybody at that hospital. So here we go. This gets really dark. And if you're feeling squeamish or you're eating your dinner, then press pause, wait for your dinner to finish, and then you can carry on. Janet. When William came out, the family went home. Paul was desperate that Leah should not be alone at the time she physically died. But he could not face going into the operating room. I didn't want to either, but because of my nursing experience of operating theatres, I decided to do this one last thing for Paul and Leah. So she's saying she's going into the operating theatre. When Vanessa, the transplant coordinator, came to see us, I asked her if I could accompany Leah into the operating room. Although this was an unusual request, oh my God, you're telling me, Vanessa agreed that I could, but only after warning me about the sights and sounds I should expect when in the operating room. I explained I had worked in the theatre before and was familiar with that kind of atmosphere I should expect to find in there. Vanessa offered to arrange to put a screen up so I would only see Leah's head as they're removing her organs. We had to wait for the porters to take Leah from the room into the operating theatre. It seemed to take forever. There was quite a different atmosphere in that room. The machine Leah was now connected to was much noisier. It was very awkward trying to say goodbye to Leah because of the noise coming from the large bellows and because of all the tubes attached to her. Wendy, Cindy and Emily were all crying. I remember telling Leah I loved her, not to worry, that she'd be all right. I know that sounds a daft thing to say, but that's the way it came out. I stroked her hair. Paul kissed her and said his goodbyes. I gowned up and Leah was wheeled away. During a transplant, the organs that need oxygenating have to be removed first. Leah's kidneys and liver were therefore removed first of all. Then, after what seemed like ages, they at last allowed me into the operating room. The cardiac monitor was on one side of Leah with the anaesthetist, and I was on the other. The aorta and large artery of the heart was about to be clamped. When this was done, Leah's heart would stop and the line on the monitor would go flat. Ooh. When I went in, I stroked Leah's cheek. She was already very pale. I bent and kissed her damp forehead and whispered, "Night, night, Leah." Oh no, she doesn't say that. She says, "Night, night, Leapy." Leapy was her nickname, as in Leapy Lee. Who's Leapy Lee? You'll be all right, I promise. I could not see her body because of the screens. Oh, hold on, let me get this up. Oh, God. You don't need to see it. I'm reading it to you. At 6:03 a.m. when her aorta was clamped, Leah suddenly felt cold and clammy like a heart attack victim and the monitor went flat. At the same time, blood poured down a tube into a bucket by my feet. It was Leah's lifeblood draining away right in front of me. And it haunts me to this day. Oh, why did you go in there? Very distressed, I left. Oh, held up by Vanessa to be reunited with Paul. He claimed he had experienced something like an electric shock at the precise time Leah's heart had stopped or been clamped. I thought, oh God, is she really dead? If I said to the doctors, "You're not going to do this," they would have had to stop. But I didn't. When the transplant teams had finished their work, Paul and I were allowed to go in to see Leah. She was lying there, covered with a sheet up to her shoulders. She was so pale, so colourless. Oh, God. I stood there thinking, oh, God, what have I done? It's a feeling I'm sure will never go away. Yeah, what? Oh, God. The only consolation we had from Leah's death was that her organs would be helping 6 or 7 people start a new life, and possibly someone would be helped to see again. Leah's liver, both kidneys, her spleen, her heart and lungs, both corneas and her windpipe were donated. One thing has to be emphasised though. At the time, it is dreadful. But Leah was treated with respect at all times, and after all, when the funeral is over and done with, what is left? It was Leah's wish to donate her organs if anything happened to her. In retrospect, although, it was the hardest decision we have ever had to make. But it was also one of the best. Leah will never have her own children, yet we will know that 5 people live on, 2 people can see, and a baby's life has been saved because of her. She lives on in them and their families. When the reality of what is left of Leah hits home, you realise what a waste it would have been not to have carried out her wish. To those recipients, I say, don't have any negative feelings, only very positive ones. Whoever you are, live long and happy. To any other relative who should find themselves in a similar position to us when the initial grief is over, I would say you won't ever regret that decision. And then jump straight to this. 4 hours later at 10 a.m. we faced the press again, and it was our decision to do so. Oh, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm feeling pretty damn sick. Now, I can tell you, I'm going to skip to it just to put it in context, right? Because I am going to skip to it now. I've got to find it. So, I can tell you that during this book, they go on and on about the organs and how virtuous it was and all of this. And not for one moment do they say it was their decision. They always say it was Leah's decision and that she had this donor card and it was her wish to donate her organs and all of this. So they go on about it a lot. And they say that the press were desperate to find out who had received her organs and that they were hounding them about it. Well, maybe they were. Anyway, fast forward to the 1st of December. So we're now at the 1st of December and it's Leah's funeral. And at Leah's funeral, there's 2 poems read. So the eulogy that Paul Betts himself reads out goes just, well, so obviously Don, their favourite and friendly priest, does a marvellous service. And they say that they contact Oasis to see if they can play Wonderwall at the funeral. And like Oasis go, yeah, no problem, play that Ecstasy Girl's Death funeral. Anyway, so Leah was brought into the church to the sounds of Wonderwall by Oasis. And then Paul reads this eulogy, and you can tell me what you think. Quite a long time ago, a pretty little ship was created. Its owner looked down upon it with love and affection, and was very proud, as it was part of his blood, sweat and tears. It was perfect in every way. During the following years, he fitted the little ship out with a radar and a compass, lights, echo sounder, radio and log. He thought he had prepared the little ship for anything the sea could throw at it, and it could communicate as and when needed. He trusted it with all his heart and believed that wherever it went, it would return safely. One day, the little ship was to enter uncharted waters, unbeknown to its captain. The evening started calmly with a gentle glow. In the sky, and the little ship was decked out in all its splendour, with a soft wind filling the sails. But it was not long before the little ship was in a full-blown storm. It was tossed from wave to wave. You could hear it cry out in pain as the sea bashed against its sides and made its ribs groan under the strain. Its captain fought to maintain control, but the sea had taken charge of the little ship, and the captain was powerless to do anything. He could only sit in the cockpit and watch as his beautiful little ship tried to weather the storm. All of a sudden, a gigantic wave lifted the little ship into the air and tossed it onto jagged rocks. The little ship's timbers split, and it shuddered under the strain of the sea's constant hammering. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the storm passed, and all was quiet. The captain looked at his pretty little ship, now motionless and silent upon the rocks. He could see the damage the sea had done, and he tried to patch the holes so that the little ship would be alive and float again, but it was all in vain. His little ship was lost and would never sail the sea. The captain's heart was heavy. It appeared all his preparation had been in vain. Why, oh why, he thought, but no answer came. He now felt so alone and helpless looking at his lifeless little ship. As he lifted his head in sorrow, he could see other little boats coming towards him from an island. The people took his hand and gave him some support and comfort. They took him and carefully carried his little ship to the island, where they placed it on a sandy harbour where the sea could do no more damage. The captain looked at his little ship with love, affection and sadness, and was preparing to say to it his fond farewell when something made him look along the coastline. There he noticed other little ships that had been left high and dry, still greatly loved by their captains, as they had been protected from the elements. They too were in need of repair, but were not in such a bad state as his little ship. One of the ships needed a new keel, a mast and sails. These were the heart and lungs of the ship. Another needed a compass, another lights, another radar to see. He realised his little ship could provide all the essential parts to repair these other boats. The captain told the islanders his thoughts. They were overjoyed. They came to his little ship with great love, affection and compassion, and removed the vital parts needed for the other boats. It was not long before 6 boats from along the coastline were back at sea, enjoying a new lease of life, being free again. These boats also brought a fresh breath of fresh air and hope to their owners, who had almost given up hope of ever going back to sea again. The captain went back to the sandy harbour and looked down upon his once pretty little ship. All that remained was the bare hull. Its very being had been removed. He then turned and looked out to sea and saw the repaired boats sailing, and although his heart was sad at the loss of his cherished little ship, he felt pride for her as he saw her living on in the other boats, and therefore she would be remembered not only by him, but by many other families which he had helped. He then turned back to his little ship and whispered the words from the title of a famous song, "I will always love you." He knew now his pretty little ship was truly at peace, and with one last glance he turned and walked away. Now that's that, so you can get it in, because regarding the whole Essex boys thing, they were questioned, and this was a big thing that happened, very, very close to where they lived. But, so it's page 45, but they failed to mention it. Paul doesn't mention it at all, and Janet waits until chapter 10 to mention it, whereas from here, the whole funeral, Christmas Day, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, la la la. So you can see it's a complete, very, very glaring gap there. And then chapter 10, the only time it's mentioned, so it's not in chronological order at all, but I will show you where she mentions it and exactly what she says. So Janet says here, Chapter 10. So much has happened to us since we formed Action for Drug Awareness. We have met so many people and travelled to so many places. We have met rich and famous people we would never have dreamed of meeting prior to Leah's death, right down to the most wretched addicts at the bottom of the social pile in the course of our efforts to heighten awareness of the drug culture. To detail everything and everyone would simply be too much for the readers to take in. Let's just say our feet have hardly touched the ground since she died. However, some things just cannot be overlooked for a variety of reasons. It would be nice to be able to put everything in chronological order, but because of the way things have worked out, this could often prove confusing. Nevertheless, what follows is in order of consequence. Shortly after Leah's death, 3 men were found shot dead in a Range Rover in the village of Rettendam, which is not far from our home. The police quickly came up with the theory that the murders could be drug-related, possibly a gangland contract. You can imagine my horror when the following day the police arrived at our home in the course of their inquiries. Needless to say, it was not a very pleasant experience, although they assured us from the outset that they were sure we were not concerned with the murders in any way. However, because we lived so near to the murder scene, they needed to make sure that they had covered every angle, especially as we now had such a high public profile. The press would be sure to link Leah's death to drug-related killings. Initially, Paul found the arrival of the police quite amusing. "This is just my luck," he said. "I can just imagine Leah up in heaven giggling her head off at this." What, her dad being questioned for murder? But then he realised just how serious the situation was. Paul and I were both interviewed as though we were suspects. We were separated. Paul was taken into the dining room with one officer, and I remained in the lounge with another officer. We had to go through all our movements on the night of the shootings in detail. On the day in question, We had been to visit Leah's grave and had taken the pretty route back, which was unfortunate, as we had travelled rather close to where the incident had taken place. When we arrived home from Leah's grave, we were interviewed by Tim Evans and filmed by a cameraman called Mike Goodman, both from Aglia Television. At the actual time of the shooting, how does she know what time it is? Tim and Mike were at home with us in our living room. We had, in fact, passed by the murder scene earlier than the shootings had been estimated to have taken place. Later on the day of the shootings, Paul had taken Emily over to Wendy's. There was snow on the ground, and Paul was keen to try out his four-wheel drive qualities of his larder car, so he travelled the long way home through all the country roads. He travelled past that area once again, and so had travelled past it twice that day, and that was what gave us a few problems, as it was considered he had taken longer to get back from Wendy's than he should have done. We were asked to produce the clothes and shoes we had been wearing on the day of the shootings. Paul and I own 2 shotguns, as we are keen clay pigeon shooters. Our clothes and our guns were taken away for examination, as well as some live ammunition and our gun licenses. I was even fingerprinted. It was a strange feeling. I can understand how easy it is to become quite upset under these circumstances, but I knew we were innocent. But at least I understood why the police were questioning us. After all, I had been married to 2 police officers. While I was being interviewed, the police officer asked me if anyone could verify my story. As we spoke, the news came on our television. Tim Evans appeared on the screen reading a news report. "There you are," I said. "He can vouch for me. He was with me at that time, and so was his cameraman." We've seen Tim since, and he told us that the police did indeed check out our account of our whereabouts. And then it goes on to say worse was to follow. A short time later, Paul was told by the police that threats had been made on his life. I was not told until a couple of days later, when a policeman turned up at the door with a little box with aerials and things on top. It had a panic button, and the policeman spent quite a while fitting the box up in the house. The idea was, in the event of emergency, we needed to press the button, and in theory, the cavalry would arrive. This was something I'd not counted upon, something I'd never even thought could happen to us. I could not understand why anyone would want to harm Paul. What had he ever done to hurt anybody? I just couldn't figure it out. But I didn't like the situation at all. I became paranoid about this little button. I took it wherever I went, just in case. Apparently there was a list of people in the drug scene who had been causing trouble, and it had been suggested that Paul might have leaked the list to the police, who told him there was a contract out on him. I was especially scared for William. I wouldn't even let him walk down our lane. I declare here and now that nobody can hurt me any more than I had been when Leah died, and I don't fear my own death at all. But as for my kids and Paul, well, that's another matter. Paul made light of the threats. "Oh, I've heard it all before during my police career. It doesn't mean anything to me," he added. "If I was come to face with it, well, that would be different." Okay, so that was part 3, and we are going to look more at his statement and what was said in the press in the next episode. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for getting involved, and let me know your thoughts and comments below. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe.
And I hate this parson. That's a plight.
It said that Paul Betts, on the day of the murders, decided to take a scenic route back from Leah Betts' grave, and he'd been in the area of the murders. That evening, Paul Betts had decided to go for a drive and test out his new four-wheel drive, and had been in that area again.
Obviously, there was clear motive. And on top of that, it was well known he had experience with firearms.